So take a look at some data that I gathered from hundreds of salespeople tracking their revenue. What you can see is that the givers go to both extremes. They make up the majority of the people who bring in the lowest revenue, but also the highest revenue. And the same patterns were true for engineers' productivity and medical students' grades. Givers are overrepresented at the bottom and at the top of every success metric that I can track. Which raises the question, how do we create a world where more of these givers get to excel? And I want to talk about how to do that not just in businesses, but also in nonprofits, schools, even governments. Are you ready? All right, I was going to do it anyway, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. The first thing that's really critical is to recognize that givers are your most valuable people, but if they're not careful, they burn out. So you have to protect the givers in your midst. And I learned a great lesson about this from Fortune's best networker. It's the guy, not the cat. His name is Adam Rifkin. He's a very successful serial entrepreneur who spends a huge amount of his time helping other people. And his secret weapon is the 5-minute favor. Adam said, look, you don't have to be Mother Teresa or Gandhi to be a giver. You just have to find small ways to add large value to other people's lives. And that could be as simple as making an introduction between two people who could benefit from knowing each other. It could be sharing your knowledge or giving a little bit of feedback. Or it might be even something as basic as saying, I'm going to try to figure out if I can recognize somebody whose work who has gone unnoticed. And those 5-minute favors are really critical to helping givers set boundaries and protect themselves. And the second thing that matters, if you want to build a culture where givers succeed, is you actually need a culture where help seeking is the norm, where people ask a lot. This may hit a little too close to home for some of you. What you see with successful givers is they recognize that it's okay to be a receiver too. And if you run an organization, we can actually make this easier. We can make it easier for people to ask for help. A couple of colleagues and I studied hospitals, and we found that on certain floors, nurses did a lot of help seeking, and on other floors, they did very little of it. And the factor that stood out on the floors where help seeking was common, where it was the norm, was there was just one nurse whose sole job it was to help other nurses on the unit. And when that role was available, nurses said, oh, it's not embarrassing, it's not vulnerable to ask for help, it's actually encouraged. Now, help seeking isn't important just for protecting the success and the well-being of givers. It's also critical to getting more people to act like givers. Because the data say that somewhere between 75 and 90% of all giving in organizations starts with a request. But a lot of people don't ask. They don't want to look incompetent. They don't know where to turn. They don't want to burden others. And yet, if nobody ever asked for help, you have a lot of frustrated givers in your organization who would love to step up and contribute if they only knew who could benefit and how. But I think the most important thing, if you want to build a culture of successful givers, is to be thoughtful about who you let onto your team. I figured you want a culture of productive generosity, you should hire a bunch of givers. But I was surprised to discover, actually, that was not right. That the negative impact of a taker on a culture is usually double to triple the positive impact of a giver. Think about it this way. One bad apple can spoil a barrel, but one good egg just does not make a dozen. I don't know what that means, but I hope you do. No, let even one taker into a team, and you will see that the givers will stop helping. They'll say, I'm surrounded by a bunch of snakes and sharks, why should I contribute? Whereas if you let one giver into a team, you don't get an explosion of generosity. More often, people are like, great, if that person can do all our work. So effective hiring and screening and team building is not about bringing in the givers. It's about weeding out the takers. And if you can do that well, you will be left with givers and matchers. The givers will be generous because they don't have to worry about the consequences. And the beauty of the matchers is that they follow the norm. So how do you catch a taker before it's too late? We're actually pretty bad at figuring out who's a taker, especially on first impressions. And there's a personality trait that throws us off. It's called agreeableness, one of the major dimensions of personality across cultures. Agreeable people are warm and friendly, they're nice, they're polite. You find a lot of them in Canada, where there was actually a national contest to come up with a new Canadian slogan and fill in the blank as Canadian as... And I thought the winning entry was going to be as Canadian as maple syrup or ice hockey. But no, Canadians voted for their new national slogan to be, I kid you not, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances. Now, for those of you who are highly agreeable or maybe slightly